So we've got fresh news from two sources.
Okay.
Kringvarp, Faroe.
The national broadcaster.
Exactly. And then we've got Delasafo, and that's got a little bit more of a variety.
Right. More of a mix.
Yeah, the Faroes already, so no need for, Faroes 101. But
Right.
we are going to look at what these stories tell us about what's shaping the islands, the society, the politics, all that stuff, and maybe even how it affects you.
I liked it.
Yeah. Okay, so first up, let's talk politics because,
Always a good place to start.
municipal elections are coming up,
Right. Right.
and it seems like everybody's talking about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? These local elections, sometimes they're overlooked in other places.
Mhm.
But in the Faroes, people are really paying attention. And in Hofo Fallow highlights this one candidate in Torsham
Okay.
who is advocating for youth retention.
Interesting. So, like keeping young people on the islands.
Exactly. And it's not just empty campaign talk.
Right.
It reflects a real concern about the future of the island.
Yeah. If young people leave, who's going to keep things going right?
Exactly.
And speaking of keeping things going in, Forsofo also mentioned another candidate in Torshavn,
Yeah.
focusing on infrastructure.
So investing in the island's future.
Yeah, it seems like that's a really important topic for voters.
Absolutely. And this ties into the bigger economic picture.
Mhm.
Both Kringvarp Faroe and VP.fofo, which is the business news site,
Right.
are talking about the resignation of the chairman of the board at Posta.
Oh, yeah, the Postal Service.
Yeah, the Posta shakeup.
That was a surprise.
It was. And then the appointment of Arnie H. Ellefson as the new chairman.
Okay.
It's really got people wondering, what direction is the Postal Service going to take?
Especially with all the talk about modernizing and maybe even privatizing.
Exactly. All these big questions up in the air. And then VP.of kind of brings it back down to earth a little bit with an article about salaries for public officials.
Okay.
And what's interesting is they're trying to find this balance.
Very.
On the one hand, they're saying you need competitive salaries to attract good people
Right.
for those important government positions.
Makes sense.
But then on the other hand, they're also saying you have to be responsible.
Right. You can't just spend money you don't have.
Exactly, especially in the Faroes with their unique economic situation.
Yeah, that's a tough one.
Yep.
How do you attract the best people while also being careful with money?
It's a real challenge, and it makes you think, how does a place like the Faroes
Mhm.
balance economic growth with keeping their way of life?
Yeah, something to think about for sure.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's shift gears a little bit and look at what's happening socially and culturally.
Sounds good.
Kringvarp Foria had a report about a study in Eyster Kommune,
Okay.
and it found that a lot of children are feeling lonely after school.
Oh, wow. That's really sad.
Yeah, and it's kind of surprising because you think of Faroe society as being very close-knit.
Right. Very
Did we-
community-oriented.
Yeah, so what's going on?
Right. What's causing this?
Yeah, could it be family structures changing or technology, or maybe even something about living in the Faroes?
It's a good question, something to keep an eye on.
Absolutely. And on a brighter note,
Yeah?
both Kringvarp Faroe and VP.fo were talking about the M.A. Jacobson Awards.
Those are always exciting.
Yeah, they celebrate achievements in literature, art, and culture.
It's a great way to see what's happening in the Faroes art world.
Exactly like Vomgjert Vang was recognized for her writing,
I love her work.
and Elin Michelson for her work in children's culture.
Oh, she's fantastic.
Yeah, really cool stuff. And speaking of connecting with people in Fairfo,
Yeah.
brought up a point that ties into what we were talking about earlier.
Oh, okay.
They say there's a need for more teachers of Faroes as a second language.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah, they say it's because the islands are becoming more diverse.
Oh, wow. So all these pieces start to fit together.
Right, like supporting newcomers by helping them learn the language.
Right.
Not only makes them feel more welcome, but it could also make the Faroes even more vibrant.
Exactly. And
Right.
maybe even help with that youth retention problem.
Wow, it all comes full circle.
It's amazing how these things connect.
It really... Okay, so before we move on, anything else that stood out to you from these news stories?
I think the contrast between the loneliness study and the need for Faroes language teachers is really interesting.
Yeah.
It shows how the Faroe Islands are trying to hold on to their strong sense of community
Mm-hmm.
while also adapting to a changing world.
Yeah, that's a tough balancing act for sure.
It is, yeah. It's a story we see playing out all over the place, but it feels different in the Faroes.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've talked politics, economics, and some social stuff,
Mm-hmm.
but you can't talk about the Faroes without talking about nature, right?
Oh, you're absolutely right. Both the beauty and the danger.
And unfortunately, Both Kringvarp and VP.4 reported on the loss of two Faroes fishermen.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah, they died at sea this year. Just a reminder of the risks that come with living so close to the ocean.
It's a hard truth, and VP.full also had a story about a young man who died. He fell at Kerberg.
It's so sad,
It is, it just shows how fragile life can be.
especially in a place like the Faroes.
Right, with the rough landscape and the unpredictable weather.
And it's not just the immediate environment you have to think about.
Right.
Both news sources also mentioned the flooding in Spain.
Oh, yeah, that was horrible.
Over 200 deaths in Perfor reported.
It's just a reminder that even though the Faroes haven't had flooding like that,
No.
they are still vulnerable to natural disasters.
It really puts things in perspective.
Yeah.
Even a place like the Faroes that seems so remote and self-sufficient,
Right.
it's still connected to the rest of the world.
Absolutely. Everything's connected. And speaking of connections,
Okay.
Computer Fire had this kind of funny story about a major internet outage.
Oh, really? What happened?
Apparently, some workers accidentally cut a cable near Shaw.
Oh, no. Can you imagine?
It was chaos.
Yeah.
I guess businesses were disrupted, services were down.
Yeah. Nowadays, even losing the internet for a little while can feel like the end of the world.
It really does show how reliant we've all become on technology.
Even in the Faroes.
Right, even in a place that's so connected to nature.
Yeah, but I bet people found a way to cope.
Oh, I'm sure they did. Probably rediscovered the joys of talking to each other face to face.
Or just enjoying the scenery.
There you go. Always a silver lining.
Okay, so before we move on, I wanted to go back to something we talked about earlier.
Sure.
The M.A. Jacobson Awards.
Yeah.
I was really intrigued by the winners, Von Gert Vang for literature and Ellen Michelson for children's culture.
They're both so talented.
It seems like the Faroes have a really thriving creative scene.
They do. Those awards really show how much they value their culture.
Yeah, and it makes me think about that article we talked about.
The one about Faroese language teachers?
Yeah, supporting newcomers and helping them become part of the culture actually help keep those traditions alive.
That's an interesting thought.
Yeah, maybe by bringing in new perspectives, they could actually make those traditions even richer.
It's like a balancing act, holding on to the old while embracing the new.
It makes you wonder what the future holds for the Faroe Islands.
It's a fascinating story that's still unfolding.
Yeah. Okay, so we've covered a lot today.
We have.
Elections, economics, social changes, culture.
And nature's power.
So I want to hear from you, our listener. What stood out to you the most?
Yeah, what really resonated with you?
What did you learn about the Faroes that you didn't know before?
And what questions are you left with?
Because the best deep dives are the ones that make you want to keep learning.
Exactly, the ones that spark your curiosity.
Okay, so before we go, there's one more news story I want to talk about. Both Kringvarp Faroe and VP.fo have been reporting on this controversy surrounding both Kringvarp Faroe and VP.fo have been reporting on this controversy surrounding the expansion of the salmon farming industry.
Oh, yeah, that's been a big topic.
Yeah, it seems like people have really strong opinions about it.
Well, it's understandable. I mean, the Faroe Islands have always been connected to the ocean.
Right, fishing, aquaculture, it's all part of their history.
Exactly, and salmon farming has become a really important part of the economy.
But now there are worries about the environmental impact.
Right, some people are saying it could harm wild fish stocks and the ecosystem.
So is that balance again,
Uh-huh.
Economic growth versus protecting the environment.
It's a tough one, and it's something we've seen come up again and again in these news stories.
Yeah, for sure. And it's especially important in a place like the Faroes that depends so much on the ocean.
Right, it's not just about the economy, it's about their way of life.
Exactly. So it's a really big decision for them,
Absolutely, they have to weigh the potential benefits.
like creating jobs, especially in those smaller communities.
Right, against the risks to the environment.
The very environment that they rely on.
It's a tough call.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Definitely. But hey, on a lighter note,
Okay.
Krufo had this nice story about a concert
Oh, yeah.
at Riansaria celebrating their 10th anniversary.
That's cool.
Yeah, it's a great example of the vibrant cultural scene in the Faroes.
And it kind of makes me think about that study we talked about earlier.
Well, what about loneliness?
Yeah, events like this concert, they bring people together.
Exactly.
And that can be really important for building community.
Absolutely. Especially in a world that can feel so isolating sometimes.
It's a good reminder that we all need connection.
And that music has this incredible power to bring people together.
Okay, well, I think that's a perfect place to wrap things up.
Yeah,
We've covered so much in this deep dive.
we have.
Elections, economics, social trends, culture, even some sad stories about loss.
But also stories about resilience and creativity.
and the amazing connection the Faroes people have with their environment.
Hopefully you learned something new about the Faroes today.
Yeah, and maybe even have some new questions.
Because that's what it's all about, right?
Exactly, sparking your curiosity and making you want to keep exploring.
The Faroe Islands are full of surprises.
So until next time, keep diving deep.